Reality Check with Craig Price.
Oh, right, sorry.
I'm an idiot. 4 minutes in and I'm already wrong. I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me! Craig, shut up.
Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump. So it's another great Reality Check with Craig Price. On today's show, Gordon Quan of Foster Quan joins us to talk about immigration. Gordon is a former city council member and the former pro tem of the city of Houston under Bill White. So I really couldn't think of a better person to bring on the show than Gordon, who is, an expert in immigration law. His law firm, Foster Quan, specializes in immigration. Not only just people coming into the country, but also Houston has a lot of oil and gas companies here. Those companies are global, so they have to send people for limited time, sometimes extended times, to other countries to work. So that he helps them with work visas and things like that. So I thought his combination of politics plus his expertise in immigration would really help clear up a lot of things for a lot of people, because I find that immigration is that hot button issue that a lot of people don't really understand, but politicians use it to scare other people to vote. It's how they really rally their base, and it's easy to point out a villain. It's easy to just go, hey, it's the Mexicans, or hey, it's the Chinese, or hey, it's the Indians, or the Pakistanis, or whoever. It's just easy to identify someone who is not that person. So it's like, they're not like us, they're different, they sound different, they act different, they eat different things. They must be bad because they're stealing our jobs. So I'm sure this is going to be one of our more political shows, and I definitely want to get your feedback on it. So always email me at Craig@SpeakerCraigPrice.com. You can go to realitycheckpodcast.com and leave a comment right there, just like if you were going to a blog, just leave a comment right under the episode. Keep it civil. We want to, we're smart, educated people trying to learn and better ourselves. We don't need to degrade it down into name callings, slurs, as the internet is wont to do. And since you're at the website now, leaving comments, as I just suggested, don't be afraid to sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter comes out once a month. It comes out the first Tuesday of the month, and pretty much gives you a recap of the episodes you may have missed, and it gives you highlights of who's going to be coming up, so you can pick and choose who you want to hear, and if you miss somebody, you can go back and listen to them. So you can always sign up at the website. You can join the RSS feed. You can sign us up on iTunes. Any way you want to get us, we are here for you. I think this is going to be one of my more interesting podcasts. I certainly learned a lot from it. So let me give you Gordon Quan.
We appreciate you coming out and speaking to our office group, and I think everybody really enjoyed that. That was, that had been a tradition of our Quan Burdette side of the firm, and the Tyndall and Foster people think, like, what is this about? This office conference?
I get that a lot anyways when they're in the middle of it. They're going, what is this guy doing? And then we were just talking about I-9s and immigration reform, and now we're talking to this guy who's kind of bouncing around, and he's making fun of Joe up front and doing all kinds of weird
Calling
things.
Charles old and everything.
Well, Charles is a nice guy, but he's not young.
Okay.
How's that? Is that politically correct?
Fine,
he's
old.
There's nothing wrong with being old.
Yeah, that was good. It was okay.
He's young at heart. I'm here with Gordon Quan of Foster Quan, which is, from what I understand, is one of the premier immigration law firms in the country, not just here in the Texas area.
Well, we like to think that. We've been rated as the top immigration law firm in Texas for the last 3 years by Chambers USA that evaluates law firms, and we have more board-certified attorneys in immigration law than any other firm in the country, to my knowledge.
And you've got offices in Austin and D.C. and San Francisco? Not San Francisco?
In San Antonio.
San Antonio. I knew it was a San something.
The Rio Grande Valley, Mexico City. So those are, I think, our offices.
And the reason I brought you on is I think a lot of people misunderstand, or at least only get one side of the immigration story. They hear it from either media, which will skew it to whatever channel you happen to be on, if it's on the Fair and Balanced or the Wacky Liberal, depending on whatever the situation is. I mean, you can't get straight news anymore. Everything has to be an opinion-based news. And I think a lot of people don't ever see it from the other side. I think both parties, or if you want to call it parties, but both sides of the immigration issue have legitimate claims, but I just think that a lot of people kind of disregard the information that's not on their particular side of the coin.
Well, I certainly believe that every country has the right to maintain its sovereignty and to set rules as to who should be allowed in the country. I look at it as just a membership into a country club or a private club. What are you looking for? What are your needs? And I think that we have been blessed as a country of attracting people with a great deal of skills that have helped build this country and has really provided motivation for innovation and the growth and the energy and the dynamics of the United States that makes it such an outstanding place to live.
And I find as the economic conditions worsen, the hype around immigration enlarges, because what jobs are they stealing and who are stealing them? Because I don't really think that's the issue. But
well, there's certainly a paranoia, and I always think that with any tough times, people are looking to scapegoat somebody, and there's always two sides to every coin, and while certainly there's concern about I'm losing my job, and it seems like these foreign nationals are coming in. Studies have shown that foreign workers, immigrant workers, never take more than 5% of any field of occupation, and actually they are more inclined to be entrepreneurs and to create jobs. I look at the fact that should we have a program that would allow a number of these undocumented people to work legally, that it will be a great bonanza in terms of people paying taxes, an underground economy coming above ground, people being able to buy homes, cars, and stimulate other jobs. For instance, in the field of agriculture, it's been said, well, gosh, let's get rid of all these undocumented workers. But economists tell us that for every one agricultural job, there are 3 upline or downline jobs of U.S. workers that are getting jobs because of it, selling produce in the grocery stores or shipping goods to market or selling fertilizer and feed.
But in the agricultural, I don't think they're of them as stealing jobs. I find that a lot of them are doing jobs that Americans wouldn't do. They're lower paying, labor intensive jobs that, yes, some Americans do, but I work with a lot of oil and gas, and they've been noticing that second or third generation is no longer doing the jobs because they've got that American mentality that I'm going to start my own business, like you said, or I'm going to do something else. I'm not going to do this menial job.
Well, I find it interesting, Craig, that, for instance, in the grocery industry, that's been a traditional area for immigrants. And at one time, those were maybe Jews and Italians who were doing those jobs. Then it was the Lebanese, and then for a while it was the Chinese who were doing those stores, and then the Vietnamese, and now you see so many with Indians and Pakistanis. But it's evolving because what happens, they don't want their kids to do those jobs in the future. They want them to become doctors and lawyers and have more productive positions. I know Stephen Kleinberg at Rice likes to talk about peddler, plumber, and professional is kind of a 3-generation transition for many people into the United States.
And you brought up a good point that I've seen. I'm not a big immigration person, but at least I'm a history person, and I noticed that every 20 to 40 years or so, there's another group of people that everyone hates. It used to be the Irish, and it was like the Dutch. It was like, if you go way back to New York in the 1600s, it was the Dutch, and then it was the Irish, then the Italians, and then the Jews, and then it was whoever was coming in next. It always seems to be.
Well, I think if you look back, Ben Franklin was afraid of the Germans, and that German was almost adopted as the official language of the United States when the country was first formed. But you're right. We have a great history of prejudice within our immigration laws. As a Chinese American, you may know, of course, the Chinese were the first group excluded in 1882 through the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what was the Chinese big problem? They worked way too hard. You know?
You built us the railroads. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and they're working the laundries. They're working in the dirty work during the gold rush, and it was actually a lot of the Irish who said, those Chinese, man, we don't need them. They're taking our jobs away from us.
Yeah, and they weren't the best jobs at all.
No,
they were the worst jobs you could get, and the longest hours, and the death rates were amazing.
And they looked at them and said, well, they speak a funny language, and they have their hairstyles different.
And they look different just in general.
I mean, these are not Americans. And that's really been the evolution of America, I think, is always each generation having a new wave and saying, well, these are not Americans. These aren't the Americans we used to know. And we're just continuing to go through that transition now.
Yeah, the Native Americans were the first Americans. They like to think that's like, I find it funny that in a country built on a melting pot, that people are always like, well, that person doesn't look American. Well, what does an American look like? It looks like you? That's usually what they go to, is whatever they look like, that's what an American looks like. And that's definitely not the case, especially when you're built on bringing as many people as possible and allowing them to find a way of life, the pursuit of happiness, so to speak.
And I think we are living in a very dynamic age. I mean, maybe other groups have felt the same way, but it's been said in a phrase that I like, is that immigration is this generation's industrial revolution. Just as people came from the farms to work in the cities in the 1890s, we are now seeing that the workforce will flow wherever the greatest needs are. That we're no longer bound by borders. That the brightest people will maybe in China or Russia or wherever. And as we need their skills, we transcend borders. And it's a two-way street, too. I mean, our firm not only does immigration to the United States, but we do visas going to Brazil, to Spain, wherever their needs are. And that's what we're looking at, a global workforce. There's more people who are living outside of their country of birth now than at any time in the history of mankind.
And what I've noticed is that right now everyone's focused on Mexico. I mean, especially here in Texas, they definitely focus on Mexico. They're always talking about the border and the Minutemen and all that stuff. But there is a large influx of outside countries, foreigners, coming in to our great educational establishments. They go to the engineering schools, and so the Chinese, the Indian, they come in, and the Saudis, they come all in and then learn what they can and go home.
Well, 1/10 of the undocumented population in the United States, Asia. I mean, so there's not there's this perception that it's all Hispanic. It's everywhere. The Irish are in tremendous numbers in the Northeast who are undocumented. So it's really a global population.
Well, that's my point. They're not really focusing on the Canadian border, and we've got plenty of Canadians that are coming through undocumented. Maybe we have some kind of special relationship with Canada, but I still think they have to apply for work visas and such, don't they?
Work visas, yes. We have a treaty whereby Canadians can come into the United States for 6 months visa exempt, and Americans go to Canada on the same basis, but not to work, just to visit.
Right, but but there's a lot of them that come here to work. I mean, think of all the actors that you know that are Canadian. I mean, you've got Michael J. Fox, and you go back, Lauren Green and Alan Thicke. All these guys come in, they're taken away.
And look at those Australians too.
Oh yeah, they're coming through. So it's like I find I hate to say it, but there is an element of somewhat racism in the immigration situation, because they do focus mostly on Mexico when it's really a entire system issue and not just the Mexicans are coming over.
Well, obviously, the proximity of Mexico to the United States allows them more access to the United States than other countries. But you're right. I mean, it's again, a global issue, but it seems to be focused on one group more than any other group.
And like, you come from an immigration background.
Yes.
Your parents were originally from China.
Yes.
And when did they come to America?
Well, actually,
or do you want to give away your age? I don't want to. We just talked about old and all that stuff. Now I see why you're defending Charles.
Well, it was very difficult for Chinese to actually come to the United States. My grandfather was from a village in China that was a very impoverished area, and he had to go to Mexico actually first just to make a living working at a laundry in Ciudad Juarez, and was able to go back to China and was able to finally seek immigration to the United States. My dad was also from that same village, and I was born in China, but kind of by accident. But when I say that, is my father had served in the U.S. Army right after World War II in the Army of Occupation in Germany, and under the GI Bill, my family had gone back to China so that my dad could get an education, and that's why I was born. But then when the Communist Revolution occurred in China, my family was forced to flee back to the United States. So it was kind of, I took my citizenship for granted for many years until I got married to my wife, who was an international student from Hong Kong. And I had to go through the process to get her permanent residence. And I thought that would be like automatic. I mean, I'm a citizen. It should be easy. She's not a bad person. She was a student. And it took us about 3 years because I had to prove up my citizenship before we could even sponsor her. We were basically on our second child by the time she got her green card.
Now, take it if it was my situation. I was born here. I've got, though my great-grandparents, who I've never got a chance to meet, they immigrated from Salerno, Italy. I found out recently. My mom's been doing a lot of that research because she's adopted, and so she's been trying to find her family, and she find out that we're the Vicis from Salerno. But on my dad's side of the family, we go back generations.
Yes.
So definitely an American. Now, if I were to meet, which I'm already married, so I don't have to worry about that. But if I were to meet a non-American, it's not so simple as just getting married anymore.
Well, one of the key things is, how did she get here? We have numerous cases of people who are married to U.S. citizens but who had an undocumented entry to the United States, and therefore, because of the law which says that if you're in the United States for over 6 months in an unlawful status, that once you leave the country, you cannot come back for 3 years, or if you're here for over a year in an undocumented status, you then have a 10-year bar before you can come back. So we have so many cases of people who are, say, married to Mexican nationals. They're U.S. citizens, but their spouse would have to go back to Mexico for their interview and be subject to a 10-year bar before they could come back. Now, there is a waiver available, but that's a discretionary waiver, and you have to show extreme hardship to the U.S. citizen in order to get the waiver granted.
But it's not that myth that you just, you see it on TVs and sitcoms. It's like, I'm just going to marry this guy to help him become a citizen. It's like, that's not even close to being how simple it is.
Well, if the person came legally to the United States, the person could get married and be processed. But we also have a number of laws dealing with anti-marriage fraud. And so there would be a conditional residence that the person would be subject to, and show that 2 years later they're still married to the person, or if they're divorced, that there were reasonable grounds for that divorce. So the government isn't as easy as it once was. They're checking these things very carefully, and if they find that you've committed marriage fraud, you have a bar for life from ever getting a visa to the United States.
And they do make it sound so easy. They've got this thing that they're scaring everybody with these anchor babies, which sounds like you throw them overboard to make sure the boat doesn't move. Is it really that simple? Are they all racing across the border just to have sex and have babies and stay American?
I think that there is some validity to the fact that if they're born in the United States and they become American citizens, they have more options to them available. But as far as anchoring the family and providing an avenue for their immigration, that's really far-fetched. The child has to be at least 21 years of age before they can sponsor anybody. And if their parents had entered in an undocumented or without inspection, then they too have to go back for 10 more years before they could come. So we're talking about 31 years. I mean, it takes somebody a lot of planning to figure out in 30-something years, I may have a chance to be here legally.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like they're scaring everybody with these anchor babies. Because I watched the news. I was boning up to be up here because immigration is not my bag. And it was like sitting there going, and I always hear this about the anchor baby, or just marrying somebody. It's not as simple. And in fact, to become a citizen in general, even if you do it legally, is very difficult.
Well, there's a period of anywhere from 3 to 5 years to wait, and then you have to take the examination about American history and government.
Which I don't think most citizens who are naturally born here could pass.
It's amazing. It seems fairly routine that you would think most people would know that, but I've had a number of people fail because they said, "Oh, no problem. I watch the news. I guess I can answer these questions." But you're right, and the service also doesn't want people just to memorize things, but to understand what they're talking about. And so they've made the test more difficult in that it's really more of a comprehension as opposed to just like how many stars are on the flag. how many stripes.
Yeah. And who said this, and what year was Benjamin Franklin, whatever.
Right.
And so when your father came to the United States again, because I guess after the GI Bill, you guys settled where?
Well, we settled actually in San Antonio, Texas.
Okay. And how was life in San Antonio for a Chinese immigrant?
For a long time, that was the largest Chinese community in Texas. And what you may not know, and very few people may know, is that because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, as I mentioned how my grandfather had been in Mexico, a number of Chinese had actually moved to Mexico. But when General Pershing was chasing Pancho Villa about the turn of the century, the Chinese had helped supply the American Army expedition into Mexico. So Pancho Villa had ordered that all the Chinese be killed for their help with the Americans. And
guilty by association.
And so Pershing got a special order to bring 200 Chinese to San Antonio for their protection. And eventually they were allowed to stay as permanent residents and citizens of the United States. So San Antonio, for many years, up until I think 1960, was where the largest concentration of Asians in Texas were.
And so growing up, you didn't have any issues? It was pretty well blended?
Well, actually, my parents wanted to buy a house in San Antonio, and they turned them down because they were Chinese. And this is before fair housing laws. And so an uncle found a store in Houston and advised them about this opportunity, and they ended up moving to Houston. And we rented a store from an Italian family for many years.
Oh yeah, well I'm Italian. We'll if there's money involved, we'll deal with anybody.
Okay.
We're nice like that. We're more capitalist than people think.
I always remember St. Joseph's Day. They made the greatest feast, and they'd give us some spaghetti. It was wonderful.
Well, we got the spaghetti from the Chinese. That's where noodles come from.
It kind of made full circle.
We're paying you back.
Thank you.
Now, there's a whole bunch of different laws that people are trying to enact.
Yes.
Some seem wildly unfair, and actually some to me personally, seem very un-American. The Arizona law that they've enacted, and I may get the details wrong, you can correct me on these. Basically, if a policeman stops you, which is completely legal, and asks for identification, which again, completely illegal for even non-Americans, but it's like they're just kind of wandering around. If you look like you may be an immigrant, they can stop you, ask for papers, and then deport you. That seems kind of more like when the Nazis kind of rounded up the Jews kind of situation to me. It seems completely unfair that at any given moment they just have to, hey, you look like you might not be from here, especially in Arizona where half the population is Hispanic, natural-born citizens. That seems kind of anti-American to me.
And the courts have agreed with you, and as you know, a federal judge has enjoined that law, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has affirmed that the judge had the authority to do that. One of the basic tenets, when the country was established, was freedom from unreasonable search and seizure, that we just couldn't just come into your house and search for something, or just to stop you on the street just because you kind of looked weird and I didn't like your mustache or whatever, and I said, hey.
Don't worry, a lot of people don't like my mustache. I get pulled over at TSA all the time.
So, who are you? We want to... Now, the way searches go under our judicial system is search incident to an offense. I mean, there has to be something that triggers that. If your headlight is broken or something, or you're speeding, they can stop you, and
they can manufacture that as well.
Well,
speeding is subjective unless they have a radar gun. There've been situations where the headlight crack, that's out now. I mean, some of those things can be somewhat subjective.
I'm not questioning that. You're absolutely right, correct. But what I'm saying is that just to stop on suspicion that you look illegal or undocumented or foreign is not a basis.
No,
and cases have held consistently that is not a justification because a person had an accent or couldn't speak English very well to stop. But that's why we found this Arizona law so outrageous in that it seems to target certain nationalities, and like you said, probably that Canadian who speaks good English, nobody was going to ask him questions.
No, especially if they look like Jewel, just some kind of hippie girl who's going to Taos, New Mexico to be with the earth. they see hippies come through Arizona all the time, so they would say, oh, that's just a America Californian maybe even.
So she's Canadian? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, she may be Alaskan. Maybe I'm getting Jules. Maybe I'm thinking of Alanis Morrisette.
Maybe. Okay.
Maybe Jules from Alaska,
Okay.
which sometimes I think may be another country sometimes.
But again, you can see how once you get started on that path, people can stop anybody for any reason.
Absolutely, and that's why I thought that I don't think a lot of people actually even know that rule was shut down. I thought it was still being in appeals, which I thought would be a quick appeal. Apparently it was. And then there's laws in Utah, where I was reading this earlier, that if you do get pulled over legitimately and they find out you're not a American citizen, if you pay a certain fee or a certain fine, you get to stay, and they issue you a Utah work permit, which I don't think they can actually do because that's more of a federal thing. But if they find you have a criminal background or anything else, out you go, which I don't think they can do either.
Well, actually, in Texas, we have every county has adopted this program called Secure Communities, where a person arrested will be fingerprinted and will have their fingerprints run through a data bank that will look into all types of violations, including immigration violations. And if there's a warrant for your arrest on an immigration charge, you would be detained for deportation, and then let an immigration officer come and do a review to make sure that all the information is correct.
But they pass you on to the federal level.
They pass you on to the federal level.
The state cannot deport you.
And I think really, to me, Utah was almost kind of trying to be ironic and making somewhat of a mockery of the Arizona law, so that if you can penalize people, why can't you reward people? And part of that Utah law was that to issue the work permits, they had to get authorization from the federal government to do that. They had to get a waiver. Of course, the federal government would not give a waiver that would allow them to issue work permits. But it was, I think, an object lesson saying, hey, it can go both ways. I mean,
Yeah, well, I thought they took the view that, a large majority of illegal immigrants, yes, the crime they committed was entering the country and staying. But they are productive members of society who have jobs, who pay bills, who have banknotes and mortgages, and they have car payments. And to just kick them out of the country is not really a viable situation. They keep talking about amnesty. And why are people... I understand that if you have a law and you break it, there are consequences. And if you don't enforce those laws, then the law is useless. But why can't they make changes? And what's the big fear with amnesty?
Well, I think, in 1986 we did have an amnesty where President Reagan signed the law to allow people to come out of the woodwork and apply for permanent residency. They had a conditional residence, and then they became permanent after a couple of years when they came back and took a test and showed that, again, they had no criminal record. They were trying to study English. They understood American history and government. 2.3 million people were processed under that, and it proved very helpful. But what has happened is the laws have not changed much in the last 20 years. 1990 was the last time we had any increase in quota at all. And in 96 we had this 3 and 10 year bar, which kind of trapped people in the country. We used to have what we called circularity, where people would come here, work, go back home, come here during certain seasons, go back home. My dad, again, had a grocery store in the East End. We used to, on Fridays, cash a lot of checks, and then people would buy money orders to send to their families. After Thanksgiving until like New Year's, a lot of our customers were gone. They went back home to Mexico and came back after the holiday season. But with that law, you could no longer leave the country without being subject to the 10-year bar. And right now, with the border the way it is, there's 21,000 border patrolmen on the border. It's one of the, I think, at least parts of it is one of the most monitored areas in the world at this point. I was talking to a friend who lives in Matamoros. He's a U.S. citizen, Anglo-American. Just to go from Matamoros to McAllen, about 70 miles, took him 6 hours because of different inspections that he had to go through on the bus and when he arrived at different places. So I guess, you asked about the amnesty. That I kind of got off the topic.
That's all right.
But I think there's a sense that people should not be rewarded for illegal acts, okay? And so what has been proposed is not amnesty, but a pathway for resident status, whereby a person would have to do certain things before they would qualify. They could have a temporary status to stay, but subject to them learning English, having a good police record, having paid their taxes, paying a penalty fine too, to make up for the fact that, yes, I've done things wrong, but I should be allowed to rectify my situation within reason.
How cost effective is it to deport everybody or even fine them? Just in sheer logistics. Let's not concern of ourselves with, what you believe is right or what you believe is wrong. Just enforcing the law. Logistically, how realistic is that?
I don't think anybody thinks it's realistic. There have been speculation of how much would it really cost to control all our borders, and it's come out to trillions of dollars, and that there's no way our economy can afford to do that. And then there's also a sense like, do we really want to be deprived of these people? They're adding so much to our economy. I mean, we need them, actually.
Yeah, the big thing I hear is that they are a burden on our social services, which may be a legitimate claim, but they also are basically the underlying foundation to our economy. They are, especially the service industry that I see, the construction, these low-paying labor jobs that, quite frankly, Americans aren't doing.
Well, I look in comparison to other countries. Japan, for instance. Japan has believed in maintaining a cultural purity. It's very difficult to immigrate to Japan. And so the Japanese population is in decline. It's gone from 103 million. It's projected by the year 2100 that it'll be down to 53 million, half of the population. And what is happening is it's an aging population. And as a result, they talk about an M curve for women, whereby a young woman will be educated, can go into the workforce. Then when she has children, she drops out because she has nobody to do child care. Then as the children grow older and she can go back into the workforce for a while, then her parents are aged and she has to drop out to take care of them. So there's underproductivity too. So what people don't realize is the quality of life that we enjoy to a large extent because we have a low-skilled workforce that's willing to work at reasonable rates for us.
Yeah, and the biggest problem I see with the job issue is that we're not having people steal our jobs. We have companies giving them away. Their jobs are no longer here. They're overseas where people do the work cost effectively.
And that's a part of a global economy too. That work will go to the areas that charge the least for it. And I think that we need to be recognizing that we need to be a high-tech economy. We need to focus on growth jobs, but we still need these individuals who are willing to do lower-skilled labor as well.
Well, before we leave, because we're running short of time, if there was one thing you could do, if there was one change to the laws or one policy you could implement, what would you do that would you think the one thing that would make the biggest difference in immigration?
Well,
I know it's very complex.
Many things I would like to do, but I think that the one law that I'd really like to see is the DREAM Act. And the DREAM Act is the one about kids who came here with their parents. They were not guilty of anything other than doing what their parents said they should do. They came here under the age of 15. They went to high school. They did what we told them to do. Get an education. They went to college or they went to the military. That they should have a path to permanent residence in the United States. I see so many young people nowadays who come into my office. They've gone to college. They've done well, but they can't get a work permit. They have no career. They're subject to a life of doing underground labor because they cannot do anything in a proper manner.
And they come right out of the gate with two major disadvantages. One, they're not American citizen, and two, they can't find work even as a legal alien.
Right.
And so if people want to find you, we can go to, I know Foster Quan has, you go to fosterquan.com.
Right.
They are a great law firm. I say that I have to disclose you are a client of mine, as in you have hired me to speak for your groups, and I certainly appreciate that. But I also know from reputation, you were on city council for a long time here in Houston, the mayor pro tem. You do a lot of great work here in Texas, and especially here in Houston, which we all appreciate. So thank you very much, Gordon, for your time.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me on the show.
And that ends another great reality check with Craig Price. I want to thank Gordon for taking time out of his extremely busy day to sit down and talk to me. Also want to thank Larry Scott for arranging this particular interview. It was great help, and I really appreciate it. As always, questions, comments, email them, Craig@SpeakerCraigPrice.com. We're growing in size, more listeners each week. Spread the word. I certainly appreciate it.